Good morning, everyone. Oh, yeah, we have a nice group of attendees so far this morning. My name is Patrick Vanderhyde, and I'm here with Joshua Milligan. I'll be presenting shortly about Tableau Prep. Let me just do a quick intro for Joshua. Joshua Milligan's been a consultant with Technion Data Solutions since 2004. He started as a .NET developer, creating custom software, and now consults with clients to achieve business intelligence solutions. Although his work often includes data modeling and ETL, so that's what we're kind of talking about today. His greatest enjoyment comes from data visualization and analysis using Tableau. He is a Tableau accredited trainer, mentor, and loves to contribute in the online Tableau community. Thank you, Joshua. Joshua is also the author of Learning Tableau, a book that many of us here at Tableau actually use when we get going and get starting here at the company. Josh is a graduate of Oklahoma State University and the Dallas Theological Seminary. He and his wife, Cara, have 3 young children and another one on the way. And before I get going, let me just ask that if you have any questions this morning, please use the Q&A panel to ask questions. It allows us to track questions that have been answered. Joshua will be taking part in answering those questions at the end of the presentation. If we have an answer for something along the way, we'll try and answer it, but otherwise expect an answer at the end of the presentation. Please be aware we are recording the presentation as well, and we will have it on our YouTube channel later today. I'll have that up. And with that, I guess I'll go ahead and turn it right over to Joshua.
All right. Thank you so much, Patrick. I'm excited to be here today and to talk about Tableau Prep. You've already covered the intro, so I'll just blow through it. I am a consultant at Technion Data Solutions, and Technion is a gold partner with Tableau, so I love working with clients day in and day out, solving data problems and getting answers using Tableau, and now Tableau Prep. I am a Tableau Zen Master, so that's quite an honor and fairly humbling too, to look at some of the other Zen Masters and be counted among that group. I'm also, as Patrick mentioned, the author of Learning Tableau 10. Enjoyed writing that, learned a lot. It's now in its 2nd edition, and I'm currently working on the 3rd, which will very likely have a chapter devoted to Tableau Prep, or at least a chapter. But the more important things than all of that is what I like. So I like Star Trek and Star Wars and Battlestar Galactica and The Last Starfighter. And I started to notice a pattern. In fact, I asked my wife, do you see the pattern in the things that I like? And she said, yes, you're very weird. And I said, no, the pattern is that I like things with the word star in it. So anything that has the word star, and I especially like star schemas. So I love it when data is organized into structures that are easy to use. In fact, at Technion, we've got entire teams that build out data marts and data warehouses, and they do it really fast with the latest tools that have taken what traditionally would have taken months, and now they do it in days. And it's great to come to a fact table with Tableau and hook up all the dimensions, and things just work so well. But the truth is that many times we don't have that. And even when we do, there are times when not all of the data is there. In fact, it's almost never all there. There's always some spreadsheet or set of files somewhere that have extra data that's important, that we need to see and we need to understand, and we need to bring it in. And so that's always the challenge that I run into. That and the fact that data sometimes may be structured well for one type of analysis, but it doesn't work for another type of analysis, or maybe it's not structured well at all. And so when Tableau announced Tableau Prep, I was incredibly excited because there was such a need for a tool that was easy to use and brought that same paradigm that I enjoyed with Tableau Desktop, where I'm hands-on with the data. I'm dragging and dropping, and I'm seeing the visualization right in front of me, and I'm iterating very quickly. And so when I started using Tableau Prep, and I realized, wow, it's the same paradigm. I can use that and work with the data and I'm seeing the changes right before my eyes instantly, and I'm getting feedback, and I'm seeing where there are issues, and I'm fixing it on the fly. That was incredibly exciting. And so what we're going to do today is I'll show a little bit of just an intro of Tableau Prep. So if you've never seen it before, I'll just sort of walk through some of the main features and set sort of a common set of descriptions and terms. But then we're going to look at just some of the common data issues that you might run into and how you can use Tableau Prep to solve that. So data issues like having wide data and needing to turn it into tall data. So you have a bunch of columns which really should be rows, and we'll take a look at that. Now sometimes you have to go the other way, and I do have a post on my blog for how you can do that in Tableau Prep. We won't necessarily look at that today just because of time, but you can actually do both. Sometimes the issue is that you have duplicate records, and you want to take those and get rid of the duplicates. And so we'll talk about different variations of duplicate records and what you might do to get rid of the duplicates, or in some cases maybe even keep them, but mark them as duplicates. And then sometimes you'll have data that's good. I mean, there's a lot you could do with it, but what's missing is the fact that you have a status that you need to track each day or each time period, and maybe you only have a marker for the event. So how do you deal with that? What are some capabilities that you could leverage in Tableau Prep to deal with that? And then finally, we'll consider cases where maybe you have data that works well with blending, and you've used blending in Tableau to solve certain issues. But blending can also bring up other issues that maybe don't have a good solution. So there are times when you'll be able to use Tableau Prep to take that data and change it from a couple of data sets where you have to blend it to actually bringing all of that data together into one very usable data set. And so we'll consider a case like that. Let's just take a look real quick at Tableau Prep, just sort of an intro to get started. Here's what it looks like when I open it up. I have a list of all of my recent data flows, which is what I build in Tableau Prep. So I build a flow that starts with sources, does transformations and logic and calculations, and then I end up with an output. So we'll definitely be looking at that, but these are ones that I've worked on recently. I have an option for opening or connecting to data to start a new flow. I have sample flows here at the bottom that are very interesting to look at. On the right here, just like in Tableau Desktop, you'll have a screen for discovering things, training videos, resources, all kinds of very useful things to get started. And then on the left, you have a connections panel. So this will list out data connections. You can add new ones to start a new flow here. So that will be very useful as we think about it. When you have a flow, all right, so here's Tableau Prep again. I'm going to try, there we go. Something strange, but now it seems to be working. So I clicked on the sample flow and brought it up. And the first thing that I see here is the flow pane. So the flow pane shows me all of the different sources that I have. So here's my input, and then different steps along the way. And we'll look at how you can create those steps and what they do. But what you do is you're building out a flow, and you're doing it one step at a time, and it allows you to focus on one task, one issue that you need to resolve before you move on to the next. And you can always go back and work on something that you were doing previously, but it allows you to really focus on one thing at a time. Just like in Tableau Desktop, you're focusing on one visualization at a time as you uncover insights in your data. Here, you're going to be focusing on doing one thing at a time, maybe cleaning a certain field or maybe unioning certain things together, and then you're going to move on. You're going to iterate, and so it works really well. And you're working towards an output, or in some cases, maybe a couple of different outputs. And you'll notice as I select each step here, we're seeing a couple of other things happen. We're seeing the preview or profile pane. And the profile pane is really nice because what that does is that allows you to see a profile of the data. And so it's thinking here, it's loading some of the data. I may go back to a previous one that was loaded. But when that loads, what you'll see is you'll see a list of all of your fields, and you'll have the ability to see the data and make changes in the data right as you do it. And so we'll look at that here as we look at some examples. And then the final pane will be a data grid, which will show you the data as it looks each step along the way. And so as you click each node, you'll see that update, and you'll see what's going on. And so that's kind of an introduction to the workspace. But what we'll do next is we'll actually start to consider some real examples of how you can solve some of your data issues. So I'm going to close out of that and get Tableau Prep up again. So we said we'll look at 4 different examples, 4 different possibilities of what you might run into. And the first thing that you might run into is data that looks something like this. So here I am looking at it in Excel, and the data set itself is really wide. And what I mean by that is that some of the columns are very useful the way they are. So if it indicates what dragon we're talking about, that's great. But notice that each one of the other columns in the data, it actually is just telling us one thing, and that is a date. And then the value is telling us the activity on that date. So it's very wide, because really, wouldn't it be nice if we just had a column that was labeled date that had all of these different values going down, and then maybe another column labeled activity with the associated activity. And my assumption is that that is going to be a lot easier to work with in Tableau than this kind of a data structure. And in fact, we can test that. So with Tableau Prep up and running, I'm going to grab that data set from off screen and drag and drop it right onto Tableau Prep. So just like in Tableau Desktop, you can drag and drop, in this case, a source. And it's not liking it, so I'm going to try closing. And I'm also, oh, it didn't like it probably because it was open here in Excel. We'll try one more time. Tableau Prep coming back right now. And once again, I'll drag and drop here. And you can see, once I've dragged and dropped, since it was just a single file, it brought that right in, and it's got the source node here, which allows me to do all kinds of different things, like tell it how to read the text file, whether the first row contains the header, whether to generate fields automatically. I can choose field separators, text qualifiers, all the kinds of things that you might want to adjust as you tell it how to read the text file. Additionally, I could switch to multiple files and union together a bunch of different text files in the same directory. And then another thing to be aware of is that Tableau Prep uses data sampling. Now we're going to be working with data sets that are small enough where we won't run into that today, but by default it is set to sample the data if it's very large. So that way you can keep working, you can see things happening instantly before your eyes, but you will get an indication if the data is being sampled. And you can also come in here and tell it when you want it to sample, how much you want it to sample, how you want it to sample. So lots of different possibilities there. I'm just going to stick with the default. And then the first thing I'm going to do is what I always like to do, and that's just to add a clean step. So on this little plus indicator, just add a clean step, and it will pull that up here. My machine is really not liking me very much today. So I'm going to try to restart that one more time. Make sure I've got all Excel processes closed out. And try one more time. So I'll pull over the wide data one more time. Add the step. And much better. That's what I expect. So I expect it to show me all of the data here profiled in the profile pane, and then show me a data grid with the data down here. And this is really nice because in the profile pane, I can click on an individual value in a field, and I can see the brushing throughout. So I can see what data is related and how many other fields have that value in various records. So which of the dragons had a value of sleeping on January 1st, and then what the other values were. Now, I'm going to double check what I might be able to do with the data as it exists in Tableau. And what I love here in Tableau Prep is that I can right-click anywhere in the flow on any step and say Preview in Tableau Desktop. And so I'll do that, and it will run the flow, and it will open that data set as it exists right there in Tableau Desktop. So here's that data set. And it's exactly what I would expect. I have a bunch of dimensions, one dimension for each dragon, and one dimension for each date. Now, there's not a lot I can do here. So I can start to maybe stack these things together, maybe look at it on rows, but not very useful. And I could potentially do some calculations here in Tableau Desktop, but this is a data structure that I'm going to be fighting with all along the way. There's not a lot of analysis that's going to be easy to do with the way the data is structured. So I'm going to close out of Tableau Desktop and come back to Tableau Prep and think about what I can do to work with this. One thing that Tableau Prep allows me to do is all kinds of transformations on the data. So I've shown you the add step, and we'll talk about some of the features that you can do in the cleaning step. But look at the other options here. I can do aggregations, I can do pivots, joins, unions, or add an output. And here, what I want to do is I want to pivot the data. So I'm going to add the pivot. And many of you have probably used pivots in Tableau Desktop, so it's very similar in that I'm going to select the columns that I want to turn into rows. So Shift and Select to get a bunch of them, and drag it over here to the Pivot Values field. When I do that, Tableau Prep now is even showing me what the data is going to look like after doing the pivot. And now I'm starting to get closer because I see that I've got records for each date, for each dragon and what they were doing. So this data structure is going to be much more usable in Tableau. I do notice here that that the field names are pivot 1 values, pivot 1 names. I'm actually going to change that so that I know what they are. The values are the activity. So I'll rename that one. I'll double click here on the names. This is the date. And that's looking pretty good. So I'm going to just do another clean step here to look at the data. And as I look at this, I think there's a lot that I'm going to be able to do with this. I do notice that the date is recognized as a string. So easy enough to change that to a date. And when I do, you see the format changes a little bit. Now Tableau Prep is treating that as an actual date. I look at the activity, and I realize that there are maybe a few other things that I can pull out of this activity field that would be useful. For example, I noticed that there's a lot of eating that dragons do, but maybe they're eating different things, and maybe I could start to analyze their diet. And so one thing that I might think about doing is taking this activity field, and I have some options, filter options. I can group things, so I could group all of those eating together. That could be useful. There's cleaning that I could do. If these were funny cases, I could make them all uppercase or lowercase, remove letters, numbers, punctuation, trim out spaces. This data is pretty clean. What I think I'm going to try is I'm going to try splitting it out, because I noticed that, that the action comes first, and then there's a space, and then in most cases there's another indication of what the action is acting on. So I'll try an automatic split, and Tableau Prep splits that field out very nicely. So now notice on the brushing, if I click on eating, I can see an indication of what things dragons might eat. It's kept my original activity field, which is great. And I can see the dates and the dragons that are doing those sorts of things. At this point, what I might do is I might say, well, I don't need this activity field anymore because I've got that data and even a little bit more nicely split out. So I'll remove that field, and then I'll come over here and just look at this, and don't want it called split 1. We'll call this the actual activity. And let's say that in my analysis that what I really want to know is when the dragon is eating, what is being eaten. So what is eaten? Now, there are a few things here that don't apply. So spaces, there are lots of spaces that don't apply. Dragons apparently don't eat gold. They hoard gold. They fly over things, and they burn pines, not eat them apparently. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these things that aren't things that are eaten, like gold and over and pines and villages, and I'm going to group all of those together by right-clicking and editing the value, and I'm just going to give it just a space and clear it out and press enter. And now all of those things have a new value of just a blank. So when it actually applies, I'll have the value, and when not, it'll be a blank. Notice that that I've made 7 different changes here. I've done everything from splitting out fields to grouping fields, and doing some Tableau Prep has created calculations for the split. Each one of these changes, when I look at the changes pane, I can actually go back and look at what the data looked like at that point. So here's what it looked like right after I removed the activity field. Right before I removed the activity field, there it is. And so I can go back, I can edit these changes, I can rearrange them, and at any step along the way, I can see exactly what the data looks like at that change. And so that is one of the things that I love about Tableau Prep, is that it's right there. It's that instant feedback and being able to see what's going on as you make the changes. And so that paradigm is one of the things that I think sets Tableau Prep apart and really makes me love it as a tool to work with my data. So at this point, I've got a data set that I think is going to look really nice in Tableau and work really well for my analysis. And so one of my options might be to go to an output here. And when I go to an output, I have some options. I can save it to a file. In version 1, I have the options of Hyper, TDE, so both Tableau extracts, but one is the, if you're using 10.5 or later, you'll want to use Hyper. If you're using prior to 10.5, go with the TDE. And if you have something else you want to do with it, CSV works great. So if you want to take it to another database or do some other manipulation somewhere, you have an option for CSV. People often ask, are there any other options? Not in version 1, but I imagine that that the developers may be working on other things. And if you have any suggestions for them, the ideas section in the forums is a great place to say, hey, I'd love it if I could export to XYZ and upvote your favorite options there. I also have the ability to publish it as a data source to Tableau server. So I could sign into a server and publish that as a published data source there. So that's the other option I have. What I'm going to do here is, instead of going to the output, I'm just going to take my last step and preview that in Tableau Desktop. So just as a shortcut way of getting to that data. So here is Tableau Desktop with this data set. And now notice I have all kinds of possibilities for what I want to look at. So I can look at each dragon. I can say, you know, what did each dragon eat? And I can see what they might have eaten. In this case, I can exclude things that weren't eaten, and that's really useful. I can say, you know, how many different activities did they do? So right-click, drag and drop, and do a count distinct on activities. And I can see which dragons were the most active, or at least the most diverse in their activities. So all kinds of possibilities for an analysis now that I didn't have prior to having a good data structure. So that's one possibility for restructuring data, taking a wide data set and making it more narrow, so that you have more options for how you analyze the data. Let's think of another possibility, and that other possibility is there are data sets that you'll run into where you have duplicate records. So let's think about this here. I've got a data set with again with a bunch of dragons and also a date of observation. So somebody's watching these dragons, and at least they're marking down the date. But I'll notice that there is a dragon here who has a couple of different records, and you'll run into data sets like this all the time, where you have duplicate records for numerous reasons. Maybe it's an input error, maybe it's the result of a join somewhere along the way, or the way that the data came into the system. You'll get duplication. And that's going to be problematic when you go to do your analysis, because you'll be double counting things or triple counting things, or adding up extra values. So we want to be able to get rid of duplicate records like that. And we can do that in Tableau Prep, and it's fairly easy. So I'm going to close out of Excel here and bring that data set into Tableau Prep. So here is my duplicate data set. Dragged and dropped, so it created that input node for me, and I'll just go to that first clean step just to see what I've got. And sure enough, right here in the profile pane, I immediately see that duplication, and so that's a really nice thing in the profile pane. It will highlight issues in your data. If you have a field that you always expect to just have one value, very easy to see when you don't. Now in this case, the data is exactly duplicated. And so this actually is the easiest case to solve in Tableau Prep because all I have to do is just add an aggregation. And so think about what happens if we add this aggregate step and we take all of our fields, except I'm going to exclude the number of records, which is a bonus field that Tableau Prep gives us. But I'm going to take all the others and just group by those fields and then go to another clean step. Now the order wasn't retained here, but notice that that I do now have just one record for each unique set of values. And since those duplicate values were exactly duplicated, they get collapsed into one record. And so I've gotten rid of the duplicates very easily just with an aggregation step. And then I can go on and do my analysis however I'd like, and I've very nicely deduped that data set. But sometimes duplicate data is not so easy to deal with. So imagine if the data hadn't been exactly duplicated. So what if there was another observation that was taken on another date? So now I've got duplication, but it's not exactly duplicate. So I'm going to save this, and let's take a look at what happens in Tableau Prep now. So I've saved my file, and I should be able to come back here on the input node and say refresh. And it should refresh everything, and then I'll come back to see what my data looks like after the aggregation. And I notice that I've got the duplication issue again, even after the aggregation. Well, the reason for that is that I was grouping on every single field, including the date. And since the dates are different, I'm going to get a different group. So one for the March date, one for the February date, and that's why I'm retaining that duplicate record, because it's not an exact duplicate. So what might I do here? Well, it's going to depend a little bit on my goals and what kind of analysis I want to do. But let's say that what I really care about is the most recent date of observation. So I don't care about anything that happened in the past. Just tell me when that dragon was most recently observed. That's a pretty easy solution, because all I change is from group to maximum. Give me the max date of observation, and now when I look at Dragon 3, I see that the max date was March, and that's the most recent date. I'll look at my final step, and I no longer have that duplication issue. I'm going to see the most recent date of observation. So that works pretty well in this case. But let's complicate things just a little bit more. Let's say that on each date we had an activity that was observed. So for smog, maybe it was destroying villages, and Falkor was sleeping, and Trogdor was burninating the peasants on February 15th. But on March, he was burninating the countryside. And Toothless was eating. Puff was frolicking, and Elliot couldn't be seen because at that point he was invisible. So we have a new activity, and because that activity is now different for the different date, let's think about what might happen here. I'll save this data set, go back to Maestro, or Tableau Prep, used to be called Maestro, refresh, and we have our duplication again. In this case, we have a couple of different activities, a couple of different dates, and here in the aggregation, we're going to find that most recent date. And if I come here, I go, oh wow, I don't have any duplication. And so things look great. But then I realized, well, I didn't capture the activity. So even though that new field came in, I didn't do anything with it in the aggregation. So it's sitting there. And now I might think, well, what could I do with it? If I group by the activity, I'm going to get my duplication back. If I change that to a minimum or a maximum, I'm going to kind of get this arbitrary value. Minimum would be the countryside, maximum would be the peasants, but the date is always going to be March, and so I may be getting the wrong activity. So aggregating the activity field isn't the answer either. So I'm going to just take that out of aggregation there. So what's the answer? Well, the answer, it turns out, is something like this. If I take this aggregate and I'm going to rename it the step so that I think about what that is. That's the most recent date. And I take that most recent date grouped by rank and dragon, and I join that back to the previous step. Notice that I can join and union just by dragging and dropping. So really fun stuff here, hands-on data. And so I'm going to join it back to the previous step. And I'm not going to just join on rank. Tableau Prep finds a field that same name, same type, and says that could be a good join. And then it gives you a summary of the results. Here, this isn't quite complete. I do want to join on the rank. I also want to make sure that I join on dragon. In this case, the rank and the dragon are both identifying records, so wouldn't really have to use both, but I will just to make sure. And I want to join on the date. So on the left side here from clean one, that's just the date for each record. On the right side here, the date observed, that's my most recent date. And notice what happens in the join. Notice that Tableau Prep gives me an indication of which records are going to be kept or excluded from the join. So I can see even here in my summary, I've got 6 records that will be kept. I've got 1 record that will be excluded. And I can see which record it is. It's the record for February, which is exactly the one that I want to exclude. Why was it excluded? Because when I got the most recent date, the match is going to be on March. And so that's great. So I'm going to remove this previous step, and now I've got this join, and we'll add one more step after that. And I have a nicely deduplicated data set here, maybe a little bit of cleanup to remove some of these extra fields that came from that join that I no longer need. But at this point, I have a nice deduplicated data set, and when I look at the dragon that had more than one observation, I am getting that most recent observation and the activity that goes along with it. Now, what's interesting is that if you think about how you might have solved this in Tableau, you might have thought of several different possibilities, but one possibility that would come to mind would be using a level of detail calculation. And that's exactly what we just did here. So think about this. Here we have our flow. Now in Tableau Desktop, what we might have written is something like this. We might have said a fixed level of detail for each date, for each rank and dragon. So for each one individually, let's get the maximum date, and that would give us the most recent date for each dragon, and that would be great. And then if we wanted to limit our data set so that we were only looking at the most recent, then we might have done something like this, where we had said, let's take a look at the date for each record, and just keep the cases where that equals the results of that fixed level of detail. Now notice that that's exactly what we've done in our flow. We've just done it visually. So here is our fixed level of detail. Here is our date. And here it is in the flow. So there were our individual records to start with. And then we said, let's figure out where that's equal. And we could keep only the true values. And that's what we did here with our join. We said, keep only where it matched. And so we've created this calculation in Tableau Prep. We've just done it in a very visual kind of way. And so as you think about working in Tableau Prep and you think of ways that you might have done things in Tableau, you'll be able to potentially come up with solutions that work really well in Tableau Prep. And it's great to be able to think of ways that that you can do the same thing, but to realize that you can do it in a very visual way. So Tableau Prep is pretty cool when it comes to that kind of thing. All right, so let's think of another possibility of data that you might run into. One additional possibility is something that looks like this. You have certain places or certain people or certain organizations that you track by certain events, and your data might have a field for these events. So maybe a start date, maybe an end date, but that's all you have in the data itself. Now this can be very useful. I could do a lot with this kind of a data structure in terms of analysis. In fact, if I take a look at that in Tableau Prep and then take it to Tableau, so I'll preview what we could maybe do with it even in that kind of a structure. I could look at this and I could say, well, for each place, when did the dragon infestation start? So I'll just look at the exact date there, and I can start to visualize when did it start. I might need to create a calculation of some kind to say, you know, how the length in days. So do the date difference in days from the start to the end, and that would allow me to create this kind of a visualization, a Gantt chart. So this is nice because I can see visually the length of the dragon infestation. I can see you know, how long did the dragon or dragons stay there, when did they leave. I can see when I had concurrent infestations, but this is going to be about it in terms of what I can do with it. And there may be some questions that are going to be more difficult to answer. So somebody's going to say, well, can I pick a certain date and then see or get an exact answer for how many infestations were going on at that time? Might be able to do it with some fancy table calculations, some parameters. There might be some ways to get there, but it's going to be a little bit complex. And there's going to be other things that aren't quite as easy to answer. So I might think about what could I do to structure the data a little bit differently. And what I want to do is I want to pad this out. So I have the start and end dates, but what I want is a data set that gives me a record per date for each place. And so what I'll do is I will take I'll take my my Excel data here, and I'm just going to create a new sheet with dates. Now I'm using Excel. If you're using something else, you could even create an Excel sheet with dates. In SQL Server, you could write a custom script that would just pull back a bunch of dates. My goal here is that I just want a record for each date, at least for the time frame that I'm interested in. So I think we'll go through sometime around April here. Yeah, maybe through the end of April. So I just get a record for each date here, and I'll save this and then close it out to make sure we don't have any issues. I'm going to expand my connections, and that doesn't show up yet, but when I click on refresh data, it reads the Excel file again and says, oh, you've got a dates sheet now. So I'll bring that out. And I'll just add a step just so we can look at it. It's got every date here. Notice that the Tableau Prep does allow me to do things like look at details of records, so I can see each individual value, or look at a summarized value where it's maybe breaking it up into bins of data and letting me look at it that way. So different options for how you see it. And now the question is how do I get these two data sets together? There might be multiple options, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to join them together. And in order to get my join to work exactly the way I want it, where I have one date or one record per place per date, I'm just going to create sort of a dummy join record or join field, and we'll just give it a value of 1. So notice that I can create calculations in Tableau Prep. It's got the same options and syntax that you would expect in Tableau Desktop, minus table calculations and aggregations, which are aggregations are handled differently, and table calculations would depend on a view, so not applicable here. But most everything else is here. So I'm going to get a join field on that part of my flow, switch to over here and get another join field. Give it the same name, same value, and now when I drag and drop for the join, it automatically picks that up. And notice that I'm turning 4 dragons and 120 dates into 480 resulting records, which is exactly what I want. I want one date, one record per date per place, and that's going to be great for my analysis. So I'm going to go to one more step, and I no longer need the join fields, so I'll remove those. Just like to keep the data set as clean as possible. And now what I can do is I can say, well, I've got a date, but I've also got my start and end date, and I can determine now was the place infested on a given date. And so infested, well, that's going to be true when the date itself, so that's all my dates, when that date is greater than or equal to the start, and when it is less than or equal to the end. And so true when it's infested, false when it's not. I get a nice Boolean field there. And now if I take this to Tableau Desktop, I get a very nice data set where I can look at each place, I can look at date, and I've got all the different possibilities of breaking that down by year and month, and even at the day level, I can see was it infested or not on that given date. Maybe even go down to the day level, and so I can do all kinds of different analysis now to say how many infestations did a place have, when did it have it, when I still have the ability to say when did it start, when did it end, but I can see on any given date how many infestations did I have. So I can place date on filters and look at even individual dates and see how many concurrent infestations did I have. So how many records here, and break that down by place, and was it infested or not. So all kinds of possibilities. So on that given date, I had 3 infestations. And so all kinds of ways that I can now look at my data, ask questions, get answers, because I've restructured it, and it just works really well. One last possibility, which we'll consider, and that is what happens when you have 2 data sets, and traditionally you've been using a blend to look at the data set. So imagine, for example, that you have a Tableau visualization, something like this. You're looking at your expenses versus your budget, and that's 2 different data sets. My expenses are per month, and or my expenses are 1 record per expense, so so I can look at that. Here's my budget. I have it broken up by categories and then budgeted for various things. And then notice my Excel sheet, I've got a tab per month. That kind of thing happens all the time. But my budget actually changes per month. Maybe as I get a bonus here or there, or maybe as things get tight, I might have to rework that month by month. And then you can imagine, this is my personal budget, but your organizations have budgets, and they probably get even more complex when you think of the fact that various departments have budgets and they have different line items that they're tracking. So things can get pretty complex pretty quickly. What happens though is that often we'll solve this kind of thing with a blend. So I'll take my expenses and I'll look at those, and then I'll realize, well, I want to compare that to the budget, and I'll look at that, and I'll blend on category and then month, because I'm doing my budget monthly, even though my expenses are daily, and it works pretty well. I can use the blending and get a solution that works pretty well, and then month by month I can see as my expenses change, and where I'm over budget or under budget, and that works pretty well. But one thing that you'll notice as I switch month to month, the categories are changing. And the reason is that when I'm using a blend, I'm only going to see the categories where I actually had expenses in that month. So here in March, I had expenses for clothing and medical. But if I switch over to January, I don't have any medical expenses. And in February, I didn't even have any clothing expenses, which is great, except for the fact that I can't see it. And if I really was paying attention, I would realize that in my budget, I have a category that never shows up. I have insurance, but I could go month to month, and so far this year I haven't had any insurance expenses, so I never see that category show up. And at some point I'm going to get a bill, and I'm going to be shocked because I wasn't even thinking about it. So the blend works, but it has some limitations. And I might think about doing some things like table layout and show empty rows, but that's disabled when I'm blending, so that's not an option. I might think, well, I could bring that up to pages. Now I'm seeing some things like medical. That's great, and that looks like it's working well. But notice that I'm still missing that category for insurance. That will still not show up because I didn't have anything there. So even that solution doesn't quite work the way that I'd like. So what might I do instead? Well, what I might do is use Tableau Prep to give me one data source that solves all of it. So I'll bring in my budget. Notice that I see all of my tabs. So we'll start with one and then tell it to do a wildcard union so that we get a budget for each month. We'll add this step out there, and then we'll come back to the budget, but I'm going to also bring out my expenses. And we'll do a clean step there just to take a look. And this this looks good. There's not a lot that I need to clean up. If I wanted to, I could maybe group these or clean them up, but this data is fairly clean. Not much I need to do here or here on either of these. I do notice file paths would be useful if I had more than one Excel file as my source. Here it's not really helpful. And then I also notice this table names, which gives me the name of each tab. That is useful data, but I'm going to repurpose the column to actually make it useful. For one thing, that's not just table names, that's actually a date. And for another thing, instead of a string value, let's actually treat it as a date. And now notice the Tableau Prep shows me each one as a date. Now my budget is done monthly, but the date is going to show up as the first of the month. And that's actually going to work really well, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these two data sets and I'm going to union them together. So drag and drop and create the union. And now what I'm going to get is I'm going to get records for each one. So for the budget, I'm going to have a record for each budget item, and I'm going to have a date of the first. So that's great. And then as I look down, I'll have expenses, and that'll show up here. Now I do have some interesting things in the data. So every expense line, every expense record does not have a budget value, but we'll find out that that's fine. Every budget line doesn't have an expense or a description, but that's going to turn out to be okay for us as well. As I look through here, I can even see that in the profile pane, the expenses and the budget are indicated as coming from one source only. The date comes from both. The category comes from both. And if I get it to a clean step here, I can do something similar with this table names from the union, where that's useful data, but I'll clean it up just a bit to say this is my record type. Some records are budget, and some records are expense. And at this point, I've got a great data set with only just a little bit of effort that I can take to Tableau and create a visualization that works really well. So now, when I look at category, and when I look at my expense, notice that that I see that insurance, even though I didn't have any expense there. In fact, Tableau is going to tell me, hey, you've got one record where you don't have any values. Well, that's fine. In fact, I'm going to hide that indicator. That's exactly what I wanted and expected. And we could filter by date. So we'll filter it, and we'll filter it by specific months and years. Maybe we'll start with March and even show that filter as a single value select. And we'll bring out our budget here just so we can add a reference line for that budget. We'll do it per cell, switch it to budget. It's always the sum of the budget, so it doesn't matter whether I average, min, max, or whatever on that sum per cell. It's always going to be the same. And I'll say OK. And then last thing I might want to do is just color code like I had before, where I say, are our expenses, are those over the budget? And so we can look at true or false there. True definitely is not good to see. False would be great. Null is when it hasn't been budgeted. And now I've got that same visualization with a single data set. And it works because I have both the budget and the expense in the same data set. And when I'm looking at a month, I get all of my budgets because those were the first of the month. And I get all of my expenses because those were any other date within the month, including the first. And then as I look at each month, I'm going to see every category, even if I didn't have expenses there. Except when I get to June, because I haven't created a budget yet. Now you say, oh, but the categories are cut down. Well, now I have the option of going to Analysis, Table Layout, Show Empty Rows, and now even when I don't have a budget, I'm going to get to see that. That option was not there when I was blending, but when I've created a data set that avoids the blend, it works perfectly well. So those are some examples of ways that you can use Tableau Prep to take data sets that maybe contain some dragons in terms of messy data, data that's not structured well, or at least not well for your analysis, and you can create something that you can use very easily and nicely in Tableau. We're a little bit over, so Patrick, I'll let you go with any questions that might be there. And
So the first thing is that this presentation has been recorded and we'll have it up later today. So there was a question about that. I will have that on the YouTube channel for Tableau. There's a Think and Talk Data channel. That's where we take all of the Think Data Thursday videos that we've done over time, and we post those into that area. So you can watch that there. Let's see, there's a question, I think early on you did there's a question that MS asked related to splitting a value that had 3 text string values in it, but I think when you like the food for dragon maybe example or something in it, and when it did the split, it split it I think between the first word and the second word, but not between all 3 words. And so there was a question about when you split values with 3 words, it didn't split into 3 different columns.
yeah, so that's a great question. So for example, here's a column where we might try a split on space, and some only have 1 word, some have 2, some have 3 or 4. And so if I do the automatic split, it's going to do its best guess in terms of what it thinks might work. And typically what I notice is that is just the first 2 values based on a common delimiter that it picks up in the file. But what I can do if I want to have even finer control over that is do a custom split where I tell it the exact separator, and then I tell it exactly how many fields I want. I say I want the first 3 fields or the first 10 fields, or I could do last, or I could just say, well, give me all the fields that you pick up. So make sure I got the space in there and split. And now notice it went out to 3 because it noticed that some of them had up to 3 values. So it does give you that option.
Yep. And then the next question was, could you have done a union in Tableau Desktop as well if you wanted to do the example that you had shown with the trying to avoid doing data blending?
Yes, I could have done a union as well in Tableau Desktop, and it would have worked really well there. The one thing that Tableau Prep does give you, so you'll see some things that you can do in Tableau Desktop, and most of the time that will work well. But Tableau Prep does give you all sorts of options for what do you want to do first or after the union, or pivots. I mean, if you want to pivot on a calculation, or you want to clean up your data before the pivot, you have total flexibility here in Prep. Tableau Desktop, you can do a lot of the same things, but you may not always have that fine control over what happens first or after. So I do really enjoy that. But in this case, yes, that would have worked really well in Tableau Desktop as well.
Okay. And then there was a question I think we encountered yesterday, which was the kind of pushing data from SQL Server to Tableau Server using Tableau Prep and have it refresh automatically, and kind of like a live connection, where this is essentially doing live ETL type solution.
Yeah. So again, in Tableau Prep, at least in the first version, if I look at what I can do in terms of an output, it is either going to be the file, one of these 3 files, either an extract of some kind or a CSV, or published to Tableau Server. So at least right now, there's not that option of pushing data out to another database server or something like that. That would be another process that you probably could do if you did something like to a CSV and then pick that up somewhere else. But again, if and I know that lots of people do have use cases where that would be helpful. just letting the developers know that in the ideas and let them know what your use case is so that they can track that. I know that that the release cycle on Tableau Prep is supposed to be fairly aggressive, so I'm excited to see what's going to come in future versions.
Yeah, that's great. I was going to add that, I know that if you search for the idea for the scheduling component of that the scheduling in Tableau Prep became very quickly the most requested idea after Tableau Prep was released in the ideas area of the forum. So I know it's a high priority, and continuing to add votes there and search for votes in the ideas area with the category of Tableau Prep. We added a new category when this portion of the product was released, just for adding new features to Tableau Prep. So come out and do that. Well, with that, Joshua, we have no more questions. So I want to say, hey, thank you for attending for everyone today. Most importantly, thank you, Joshua, for your presentation and taking the time to share with us today your experiences with using Tableau Prep. And if anyone else has ideas for things that you'd like to see out of a Think Data Thursday presentation, if you have something you'd like to share yourself, please don't hesitate to email our team at community@tableau.com and share those ideas with us. We're always looking for great presentations to share with the community, and that's what we got today. So, anything else, Joshua?
No, thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun. So definitely let me know in the future what might be coming up, and I'd love to participate again.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. And with that, I'll let you have your day and have a wonderful weekend as we head into the weekend tomorrow. So talk to you later. Bye.